Tips from a Storyteller's Toolkit. Produced by Final 3Con. What is your responsibility as a storyteller to your players?
A good starting point is to think about making sure that the game is fun and interesting for everybody. And that includes both teams and also yourself to some extent, making sure that you have a good time storytelling the game. If you're having fun, your players are probably having fun too. What do you think?
I think like for me, like the big things that you need to think about here are, we're here to have a good time, we're here to have fun, we're also here to play a game. So I think for me as a storyteller, one, it's your responsibility to meet your players' reasonable expectations, which means basically do your best to follow the rules. And if you aren't sure what a question is, if it comes up and someone asks, make an answer and then rule it that way. Like, your players are entitled to, this is a solving game, and your players are entitled to those reasonable expectations of solving. So that's one. Two is be fair to both teams. This is a competitive game inside the game sphere, and like, if you make choices that are unbalanced in favor of one team or the other, it's going to generally lead to a rough time for your players. And three, it's just to promote sort of the ideals, I think, of this community, which are to be kind, to be accepting, to make sure people have the opportunity to get heard. I think those are what I think are your responsibilities. It's to build for them a safe, welcoming environment where they're going to be able to play this game in a fair way.
You have a lot of responsibilities as a storyteller. You are supposed to be, if you go by Rule 3, a moderator of the game. From a gameplay perspective, you're supposed to help balance the game to be able to create a good experience for everybody that's involved. However, there's more to it than that. There's a whole social contract that goes along with it. When you're the storyteller, you are part admin of a game, you are the dungeon master, but you're also kind of like the party host, because it's not just a social deduction game, it's a social experience. And as a host, you're there to make sure that everyone's having a good time, that everyone is enjoying themselves. The way that you do this is by utilizing the abilities that are given to you as a storyteller, not just by the game rules, which do imbue you with a lot of power and a lot of ability to be able to create the game that you want and to determine how the game goes, but also by your players. Your players are trusting you to be able to create a good experience for them. When they sit down in a game that you are storytelling, they are telling you they are comfortable with you and they trust you to be able to run a game. Don't abuse that trust.
As a storyteller, it is your responsibility to the players to make sure you are giving them the best chance of having a good time. Obviously, not every game is going to go perfect, and not every game is going to be the perfect outcome. You'll have good games, you'll have bad games, you'll have in-between games, but as a storyteller, it's your responsibility to be the lookout, be the eyes on the ground. You don't want to put too much of a heavy hand on the game itself, but if you can try to pick up those little things during a game, maybe a player doesn't feel like they're getting heard, or maybe a player feels like they're being overtalked. If you can pick up on those things and cut them off at the root, you will make sure your players have a better time. And if you can keep your players on the track of solving and talking to each other, then you're more likely to get to the end result of all the players exclaiming as the grim is revealed. And that's what storytelling a fun game looks like to me.
First, I need to make sure that I put their fun as a first priority and understand that my fun comes as a secondary to the player's fun. This includes things like choosing the scripts that they are interested in, but also ensuring that the scripts we play are crafted well. It also includes making sure that the tokens that go into the bag are selected carefully, and the choices that I make throughout the game will create an interesting and balanced experience. It includes things like pacing the day and night cycles correctly and ensuring that the game doesn't drag on for too long, but also allowing space for the players to talk and not rush them too much. Finally, I need to make sure that I hear their concerns before, during, and after the game and address them thoughtfully. This might include stepping in when it's necessary, but also getting out of the way to facilitate players enjoying themselves and having fun playing the game.
Tell us about a time you had a great experience in an in-person game as a player, something memorable and fun. What made the game fun? How did your storyteller ensure it was fun?
And the first thing that comes to mind is, this is quite some time ago now, I was playing in a relatively large Trouble Brewing game with a matron, don't ask why, and I was the poisoner, and I was bluffing monk. And there was a relatively inexperienced demon, and I chose to poison my own demon because I wanted to be monk, and I had no way to communicate I wanted him not to kill, or that I was bluffing monk. And so at night, when the storyteller woke me up and I pointed out the imp, they were like, "Are you sure? Like, do you remember this was the imp?" And I was like, yes, I definitely want to poison that person. And the storyteller let me do it. And that might seem like a small thing, but it's important to note that, like, as storytellers, our job is not to try to correct the player's strategy necessarily, right? You don't necessarily know what they are thinking. I think it was a good thing that the storyteller in this case reminded me that was the imp, that I didn't like accidentally point to someone else or that I'd forgotten who the imp was. But then once that was confirmed, they go ahead with my choice, as silly as it might seem to the storyteller at the time, given they didn't know that I had told people I was the monk. But that was a really fun experience.
My favorite game of all time that I've played in was a game where I was the marionette. It was late. It was at the very first Final 3 con back in the old name. It was late. I wasn't necessarily sober, and I was the marionette in between two evil players. And it was this big tug of war between the evil team and the good team trying to convince me what side I was on. And the storyteller allowed for that kind of back and forth. Some storytellers like to be a bit heavy-handed, I think, and like to push games in directions. But the storyteller in this particular game shaped because it was a game of TB, so they shaped the information they were giving, the information that they could shape, especially to me as the marionette, to allow for that 50-50. Are you on the good team? Are you on the evil team? They read the emotions that I was having. The storyteller looked at the actions I was doing. They looked at how I wanted to play the game, and they accommodated me in the game. I think we as storytellers need to do that more. Yeah, there's some really cool logic puzzles we can do, and those are fun. But if you have players and you spend the first day watching them and watching how they want to play this game, if you can meet them where they at, those players are going to have fun 95% of the time.
What does storytelling a fun game look like to you?
I love storytelling. I think it's so fun when the whole circle is engaged, either trying to solve the puzzle or trying to stop people from solving the puzzle. I love it when there's a lot of laughs. It doesn't have to be a whole comedy thing. I've run circles that were full of intense, passionate people that cared about winning, that weren't super funny, but they really were part of the game all the way up to the end. And that burst of energy and joy or defeat at the end when the game result is announced, that's really what I'm looking for. And then that 5 to 20 minutes of really like passionate activity after the game where people are going up to each other like, why, what, how did you fool me? Or, that's what I love.
Well, it looks like the players themselves had fun. The storyteller wins when everyone had fun. So that's your ultimate goal. How to actually make that happen can vary wildly between groups, though, as each group has its own dynamics and preferred playstyles. Lean into those dynamics and playstyles. But remember to also keep people on their toes by crafting games that challenge some player metas. That's part of how you keep the game an interesting puzzle that looks different each time, like by giving information that's perhaps unexpected. Don't take that line of thought too far, though. Attempting to be unmetaable just for the sake of it can have some pretty negative effects, especially for specific characters that really need reliable storytelling in order to have any kind of positive impact on the game. Looking at you, Sailor. So, storytellers aren't able to see the future, of course, but doing your best to consider what the game might look like if you did X as opposed to Y, for example, that might be able to help with your decision making. Making fun games also looks like learning. I don't just mean reading the rule books or the almanacs or trying to keep up to date on interaction rulings. Those are really important fundamentals to keep brushed up on, and you should be doing that. But what I mean here is more analyzing the games that you've ran in a way that helps you better understand what your impact as a storyteller was. Ask yourself what pieces of information did to the landscape of the game, how it changed which players thought what worlds were viable, those kinds of things. You can note where your information may have been a bit too strong and it, swung the game a little too hard this way, or where it was maybe a bit too weak and you needed to help a team a little bit more. You can't control what other people do, so you'll never be able to be perfectly accurate with how people will respond to certain things in a game though. So this can be a bit more art than science, but it's still a really useful process to go through if you want to actively improve on your storytelling. So do it mindfully. Remember that you want this process to be constructive rather than critical. Right? You want learning from your past games to be founded in a goal of improving, not as an excuse to be mean to yourself. Treating yourself and your players with kindness is a great way to ensure that things stay fun, both in and out of games.
I'm really sorry, the answer to this is going to be very, very cheesy, but it's true. They had fun. It's fun to see the referee having fun, right? It's if they're the ones that are driving the mood and the vibe, and if they're visibly having a good time, if they're loving all of the silly jokes that they're cracking, if they're having a great time coming up with creative ways that people have been executed, if they've put on a big show, if they've created a lot of props, if they've done all of these things and they're clearly just really into it, it's hard not to also just have a good time. I mean, that's why we all go sit in a room and cheer for a band or all laugh together at a comedian. We want to see people on a stage having a good time. In fact, I'm a pretty big fan of live music. I've been to see technically incredible musicians who stand there and stare at the floor for the whole night. And sure, it's impressive that they can play their instruments well and they're concentrating really hard. But I've also seen 4 guys who can barely play their instruments, jumping around stage, having an amazing time. And that's more entertaining, even though they are significantly worse musicians, even though they're an objectively worse band. I have more fun seeing people do that because you feed off of that energy. And yeah, it's a bit of a cheesy answer, but when the storyteller has fun, the players have fun, generally speaking.
The first example is an example of storytelling within the game. There are a couple of games, definitely more than one, when Ed was running for our local group a couple of years ago. And what he did to make the game super fun was tell little stories any chance he got. So he would ask us how we wanted to die when somebody was executed. He would ask us what we wanted to use for our Slayer attempts. And in that particular game, I think because he was making this so much fun, everybody attempted to slay someone. And Ed would ask us, okay, how would you like to use your power? How would you like to slay that person? And the group came up with just more and more outrageous things. But Ed absolutely indulged us as a storyteller and told little stories regardless of how ridiculous the things were. And these stories still made sense within the fiction of the game, so that was absolutely fantastic. And I think that might have been the time when I managed to successfully slay a demon with the Twilight Imperium fleet of miniature ships. So that was super fun. So if you have that storytelling talent, or if you can try to weave a little narrative within the game, that will definitely make it more fun for your players. As fun as the game already is. Another thing that you can do is mainly when you get to know your usual group of players. You can give them powers or phrases, especially with like amnesic powers or Yaga Bubble phrases that have something to do with like in-group jokes or stuff like that, or something that has something to do with their interest or their life. For example, once when I was an amnesiac in a game that my friend Ben P was storytelling, he gave me a power of, if you speak Polish during the day, something good will happen for the good team during the night. And the way he let me know, without giving too much away, was showing me this phrase, speak Polish, which is 3 words long, during the night, word by word, on a piece of paper. So the first night I saw the word move, which is speak in Polish, and I was like, okay, probably need to speak Polish for something to happen. Town called bullshit on that, and they thought I was making things up when I delivered a whole accusation in Polish and decided to execute me instead on the second day. But hey, I protected someone in the night after the first day. So that's just a quick example of how you can weave in what you know about your players into the game to make it more fun.
Short answer, everybody is coming away smiling. Everyone's coming away laughing. Everyone's having a good time, high-fiving each other, clapping. And the biggest indicator that people are having a good time is that they want to play again.
Storytelling a fun game looks like the ending, where 3 people are like, oh, I knew I had it right. And then 2 people are in the corner like, that's how the game went? And at the end, everyone just keeps talking and talking and talking about the end game. Now that can be a Final 3, that can be a TPK, but as long as all the players are at the end going, oh, that game was so much fun, that's the goal that I chase for as a storyteller. That's the hit, that's the rush.
As a storyteller, what are steps you take before a game to make everyone feel safe and welcome?
First, I prioritize the health and safety of all the players in my circle. This includes doing things during setup to make sure that the space is as accessible to players as it possibly can be. It includes things like developing tactics or workarounds that make sure that the comfort of my players is at the center of everything I do. As an example, it is customary in Blood on the Clock Tower to wake a player, usually by touching them on the shoulder, maybe on the knee, something as a means of signaling that they are to wake up. In real life, I have run games for players who have a certain amount of touch aversion, who aren't comfortable being touched, and bodily autonomy is central to me. So finding ways to work around that, either by tugging on a script that they have in front of them, potentially using some sort of implement such as an extending rod, a wand, basically doing whatever I can to make sure that they are not only invited to come play in the space, but that the space is welcoming and accommodating to their personal needs. Second, and you'll hear this a lot if you tune into my content, I prioritize balance as a storyteller. As storytellers, it is not our obligation to heavily favor evil or heavily favor good. Rather, we should be pursuing decisions that lead to the most balanced game for either side. It is up to us to evaluate the context of the game as they progress and utilize that evaluation to make the best possible decisions in order to ensure a fair game and a fair chance for all. Third, and in a way I probably should have started with this first because it is fundamental to creating a safe space, I own my humanity and I own my mistakes. As storytellers, we are tasked to make very difficult decisions at times, and it is so important that we give ourselves the grace to own when we might have made the wrong ones. In doing so, we extend the opportunity for other players to not only hold grace for themselves, but for each other, which ultimately will lead to a fun and very fulfilling time for everybody involved.
I think there's a few things that go into this. The big one is that during my rules explanation, I emphasize specific things that I want to see from players that will help them to encourage each other to all participate in the game and all have a voice. So specifically, typically when you explain the rules of the game, you go over the 4 things you need to remember. The first 3 are game mechanics related, and the last one, which is the most important, is basically treat each other with respect, kill with grace, die with dignity, and all that. When I say that part, I like to really give a few examples of things I would like to see from players. So, for instance, I always say that I want players to make space for others when they see that they're trying to say something and aren't able to get a word in, or if someone's being spoken over, over to make sure to include them. I also will intentionally tell my more experienced players to go and strike out conversations with newcomers to the group, and things like that. So that's sort of just general things for making sure everyone immediately knows that our priority is to get them involved, get them having fun, and just have them be part of the group. There's not going to be some in-group and out-group thing. There are a lot of other things you can do in terms of making sure that everyone knows that you are thinking about accessibility. If you don't want to be touched at night, you can hold up your script so that will tug on that instead of tapping you to wake you up. I also always use a pointer stick to tap people. That way it's not me making physical contact with them, regardless of whether that's something they care about. It's just an extra step of distance to make it so that it's less awkward. And if anyone has anything that they're uncomfortable with in the situation, using a pointer stick is nice for that.
What are some good ways to deal with overzealous players or over-talking in general?
Navigating louder players and groups, and especially navigating groups that maybe don't listen when you're trying to attract their attention, is always a socially navigated issue. I always find the best thing to do is just to take a pause and remind people that you're all here to play this game. If you as the storyteller can't storytell, there's no game to be played. So there has to be some level of respect for that in the players. So if players are actively not listening to you, making it really clear the signals. A lot of times storytellers, a lot of storyteller workshops and things will recommend something that I will always back up, which is setting a signal, usually along the lines of, if I step into the center of the circle, I need you to listen to me, not keep talking. And then enforcing that, right? Making it clear to people, look, I've stepped into the circle, you've again kept talking, we need this to not happen so that we can actually run the game. And that's a conversation you may have to have a couple of times, especially with certain people. Louder players or groups generally, it depends how they're loud. Ben and I both had the experience of running games for a group that just, as soon as the day starts, erupt into just yelling and cursing and just full what fully would be abuse in other situations, of just straight up screaming profanities at each other about how evil that person is. But that's the way they enjoy playing the game. And so as long as it doesn't interfere with the game, that's entirely up to them, as long as the group has all signed on to that mentality. So you don't have to interrupt or interfere just because a group is loud. What you need to interfere with is when a group is loud and to the detriment of one or several of those people.
Filibustering. Got it. Not necessarily, I guess I should say, but I think the main reason this can be such a difficult subject for some storytellers to broach, especially newer ones, is because rule number 1 of Blood on the Clocktower is that players should be allowed to say anything that they want. But fundamentally, it is important to remember that the intention behind the rule is that people should not feel like they have to raise their hand in order to be able to speak. Some players, however, do not feel comfortable engaging in more interruptive or interjectory types of speech. And so it's very important to, in lieu of some of the things that I broached about with the first question, making sure that the space is accommodating to them. You can start at baseline by reminding players that this is a communal game, that none of us is the hero that needs to solve the game or the sole person that needs to obfuscate. This is a team game, and we should encourage the participation of all of our players, whether they're living or dead, whether we believe they're good or evil. Second, during the game, you can make time to ask the question, is there anybody here who doesn't feel like they've had the opportunity to say something that they've wanted to say? You can do this during the day phase, before the execution takes place at night, just to make sure that everyone is given a chance to speak. Third, in my community, we have a sort of unspoken rule where we utilize hands as a means of signaling when we have something to say. That doesn't necessarily mean that those hands are immediately prioritized, but it does allow our STs to be aware of when people are wanting to speak and might not feel comfortable stepping in and interrupting or interjecting on a conversation that they believe to be taking place. And finally, it is very important as a storyteller to not be afraid to be the bad guy. If someone is constantly interjecting, if someone is constantly taking up space, if someone is constantly interrupting others, step in. It is okay to interrupt on behalf of people getting interrupted. I know that sometimes we might be averse to engaging in behaviors that we find to be troublesome or problematic, such as things like interrupting or interjecting. However, one of the fundamental aspects of making sure that you create a safe and tolerant space is by not putting up with acts of intolerance. Tolerance of intolerance is not tolerance, just as silence aids no one but the oppressor. So as a storyteller, it is essential that you feel comfortable enough to step in on behalf of your players, as you see fit. Remember, you can always make mistakes, but sometimes the worst mistakes we can make is sitting on the sidelines doing nothing. So never be afraid to step in and step up. Your players will thank you for it.
In your opinion, when should a storyteller step in during a conflict between players or within the group?
This is tricky, and sometimes it might be tricky, especially if you're a traveling storyteller and you meet lots of new people and you don't necessarily know the group dynamics in established player groups. So is this my place to fix any of those problems? Remember that for some of us, other people's fun might look like conflict or too much like conflict. So to avoid misinterpreting things, that's the first clue I would give you. I would probably ask someone from that group on the side, hey, this thing I can see happening, are these people usually like this? Is this what them having fun and being okay looks like? Or is this something that I need to intervene about? And they will usually tell you, oh yeah, these two, that's their dynamic, that's them having fun, everybody knows that. There's nothing sketchy going on. Or somebody might say, oh no, actually, this and this happened, and that might have triggered it, we might have to do something about it. So look for advice. But you should definitely step in if you can see that someone is 100% not having fun. You are, by the virtue of this position, responsible for people's well-being and for people having fun. And if people's well-being is in trouble, then fun is kind of secondary and you might need to intervene. If you can see that someone is distressed or on the verge of tears, pause the game and see what can be done about it. You can take them to the side and sometimes they will tell you, oh no, this is just my strategy. And then you can have a different conversation about emotional manipulation. But sometimes they will say, no, actually, these things are stressing me out so much I can't really go back, or I don't feel like I'm being heard, or I feel like I'm being the stupidest person in the room. And then you can have a little conversation that might make things better. But maybe stepping out and just finishing the game or ending the game without that person might be the best solution. Don't make people sit for another hour or two when they're being like, where they're not having fun or they're in distress just because the game has to go on. People's well-being takes precedence. You can always re-rack a game. You can't necessarily re-rack someone's experience when they're having a bad time. So it's up to you to figure out what the best solution is. But yes, sometimes I think you might have to intervene.
We are all human, and in games that involve deception and trust, there's going to come a time when someone gets hurt and checks out of your game. That's another moment where it's vital that you have a plan. If you notice someone getting upset, it is perfectly fine to call for a timeout. Hey folks, we're just going to take a 5 or 10 minute breather. If you want to use the restroom or get yourself something to drink. Then pull the person aside. Hey, I noticed that you seemed upset. Do you want to talk about it for a sec? Then it's your job to listen. They might feel accused or isolated or steamrolled, or they might just feel like they made a mistake that ruined the game for their team. Listen without interrupting and validate their feelings. I've been in your shoes. It can feel really tough when it seems like everyone's piling on. Often just being able to talk about it and take a break can be enough. But make sure they know that they have agency. Hey, we can take a longer pause, we can swap you out, whatever you need. And then be sure to circle back around after the game. Hey, I just wanted to say that I'm so glad you were able to be in our game tonight, and I'm sorry it got tense. Is there anything I can do differently as a storyteller next time?
I think this one's a bit of a tricky one. The storyteller isn't, they're not like a school teacher or a parent who's here to set down like the rules of civilized behavior and make sure everyone abides by them. At the same time, you're the authority figure in the circle who, if a player is crossing the lines of, acceptable behavior, you're the neutral party who can step in and say, hey, cut that out. I think most of the time, like, we're playing this game with adults. In adult situations, you should let adults do their thing. But, the minute things start crossing the line from, if it looks like any players feeling picked on or, they're not having a good time, I think that's when you as a storyteller have the opportunity and even the responsibility to step in and say, hey, let's all cool down here for a second. Or even, that's not the way you should be speaking to people.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think this isn't something that comes naturally to everyone to be able to step in that situation. But it's always important to remember that ultimately, as the storyteller for the game, you're responsible. You're the only sort of person who's responsible above and beyond everyone else for making sure that the experience is a good one overall for everyone. And that includes things like if you see players having an in-game conflict, reminding them of the rules, especially of Rule 4, which is reasonably important. It's one of the best things about Blood on the Clocktower, that it enshrines playing fair and being nice in its actual game rules. So I think that's really crucial. And I think also when you see people having a conflict that maybe is outside of the scope of the game, to remind everyone that you're there to have fun together, to remind everyone that you are adults who are in a grown-up situation and people are meant to self-regulate their emotions and not bring their outside stuff into the game, right? And ultimately, try to encourage everyone to play nice with one another and, deal in good faith.
When one player is dominating the conversation, I will make a gentle reminder in town to let everybody contribute. But I will say that generally, if someone's dominating or if there's a conflict between players, I try to resolve it privately during the day if I can. I had this recently. I had two players that were really guiding every conversation, every nomination, every vote. And I just pulled them aside and said, hey, we have some newer players, and we have some quieter players. Let's make sure that everybody's contributing. And they both knew exactly what I was talking about. And they adjusted. It wasn't coming from any malice. They just really cared about winning. They were both good on the good side. And they were just excited about the game. So then they got some contributions from other people that combined more information, and actually I think their team won that game.
How do you deal with multiple players not listening when you ask for their attention?
This is sometimes easier to deal with in person than online, but there are ways that you can address both. For in-person play, physically stepping into the circle is a great way to get attention on you. It should be a signal to your players that they should quiet down some because the storyteller is about to address the group. So if it's not, then try to establish that with the group outside of the game itself, rather than while you're actively playing. So make it a part of a pre-game discussion, for example. If it's a repeat problem, make it a part of every pre-game discussion until, the habit sets in better, where people are just going to quiet down as soon as you're more visible. If for some reason that's still not working though, you could consider a different kind of cue. Something visual, like flicking the lights on and off, or something that is an audio cue, but it's not you just trying to yell louder. So something like a bell or a gong, sounds that will stand out against the tide of voices. Sometimes you can let the consequences of not listening just be their own lesson. So if players aren't listening to your second or final call for nominations, then the day can just end without an execution. If players aren't listening when you're about to run a vote, then you can just start running the vote. And if they miss their chance to vote on a nomination that they may have wanted, well, that's a consequence. Some players may object to this. They may proclaim that it's unfair, to which you should calmly point out that you made the calls that you should have. Standing your ground in this way, it can potentially come across as a bit confrontational if it's not handled correctly, so be careful with your tone and phrasing here. What you want is a discussion and possibly even a moment of negotiation where the group tells you how you could get their attention better. You don't want an argument or finger pointing.
Having everyone be so excited about your game that they're all talking over each other is a good problem to have. It means they're invested, they are engaged. But we have to be able to bring their attention back to us as the storyteller from time to time. And of course, we don't want to be that school teacher yelling hush or hear our players trying to shush each other. If you anticipate this being a problem in your group, I recommend giving a little expectation-setting speech at the beginning of your game. Let your players know that you'll need their attention at certain moments, especially during nominations, storytelling, or rules questions. And then establish a ritual attention grabber. That might be a gong if you're playing on the official app. If you're playing in person, you can get yourself a bell or something like that. Remind your players, when you hear the gong, it means it's time to listen to the storyteller. With rowdier groups, don't be afraid to repeat the reminder each morning when everyone has their attention on you. Establishing these rules early and often sets the culture around your game and hopefully prevents feel-bad moments in the middle of the game.
I would say with a new group especially, start with establishing some rules. You can say something like, yeah, you can say whatever you like, whenever you like in this game, but this is a group game when I'm trying to facilitate your fun, so there will be moments when I will be asking for your attention for mechanical reasons. And sometimes that's enough. But sometimes you might have louder players in your games who don't really notice how much airtime they're taking up. So pointing that out, telling someone, hey, maybe we can listen to everybody else right now, or hey, maybe you've been talking for quite a while and it's time to give everybody else some space. That might help. You might have to step in and moderate the accusations and moderate the nominations. And that's fine. People are usually pretty nice about it and pretty chill, but sometimes you will have a rowdy group, especially when things are getting heated and everybody's trying to solve the game. Sometimes you just have a rowdy group from the get-go. They know the game, but they can't moderate themselves in a way that's not rowdy, right? So you can just start going, hey, I'm closing the day at 10, and start counting. Count silently, or don't pay attention to whether they are listening to you or not, and just put them to sleep when you've counted down from however many things you were counting down from. And they usually will react to being put to sleep because they know the game, right? They might grumble a bit about it because they weren't done solving the game or they weren't done with the day. But after a few tries, they should learn to pay attention to your counting and to the stuff that you're doing, because you're gonna close the day regardless of whether they are ready or not.
With this, I think there's a couple strategies. One way is that if you notice that someone isn't getting a word in, you can position yourself physically to make sure that attention is drawn towards them. People will naturally look at you, or at least that should be the goal as the storyteller, is to be able to command the group's attention when needed, to sort of melt into the background, stay far away behind the grimoire when you're not needed. That way, when you need to step forward and bring attention to yourself, you can. So that's one thing, is just in general, that's something you should be thinking about as a storyteller. It'll help you a lot for bringing attention to yourself. But once you have that attention, you can then also redirect it onto other players. So for instance, if someone's giving their defense when they've been nominated, but you realize that there's a lot of other players who are talking over them, just go stand behind them and people will naturally look towards them to look at you. That's one thing. I think it's also important to realize, though, that sometimes you can't just be passive about it, or you can't be subtle about it, and you really should just step into the middle of the group, be like, hey, let's give this person a chance to speak. They haven't been talking, or not they haven't been talking enough, but they haven't had a chance to speak. Everyone keeps talking over them. And if there are just a couple of players who are presenting a problem, I would pull them aside and talk to them directly about it. I think it's important as the storyteller to be able to do that. Or if you're not comfortable with doing that, to have someone in your group who is comfortable with that sort of direct confrontation. Just be like, hey, you're drawing a lot of attention to yourself. I'd appreciate it if you took a step back. If that sort of thing continues, you can do that instead of just on a one-on-one with them. You can do it in front of the group. You can just say, hey, you've been talking a lot here, kind of drawing all the attention to yourself. I'd appreciate it if you stepped back and gave everyone a chance to speak. Because sometimes the players who are doing that, even if you confront them about it personally, they won't necessarily realize when exactly you're talking about. And as long as you do it respectfully, calling them out in front of the whole group is going to be a very effective way to tell them exactly when they're crossing the line or when they are monopolizing attention to too great of an extent.
What are some ways you make sure quieter players are heard?
In every game, you're going to have someone who's quieter than the rest. During my opening expectation setting speech, I like to remind my players that in this game, we all share control of the spotlight. And our job is to make sure that everyone gets their time in it to shine. As the game goes on, especially before nominations, remind your players. In a moment, I'm going to open nominations. Help me make sure that everyone gets their time to shine in the spotlight. And you're going to have those players who have no problem being heard, and they can be your helpers. Hey, I need your help in this game. If you notice anyone not being able to get a word in or getting steamrolled, help me turn that spotlight on them. When a high influence player shines that spotlight on someone who might be new to the group or new to the game or even just a little bit low confidence that day for whatever reason, you are sharing your strength with them, and they will remember that kindness and consideration far longer than they'll remember the game. You as a storyteller and you as a player have the power to make someone's day, and it is as easy as turning a spotlight.
Your players trust you to be able to run the game. And in doing so, what they are doing is saying that they are wanting everyone to be able to participate. You know, if a player doesn't participate in the game and just kind of checks out, that leaves a gap in the game in terms of mechanically, in terms of the information that they have, but also in terms of the overall vibes of the social experience. If your quieter players are checked out, the same thing is going to happen. One of the best things you can do as a storyteller is if you have consistent players, set expectations from the beginning with these players that you want everyone to be able to be heard and you want everyone to feel comfortable to be able to speak their mind, and that overriding people and making sure that they can't speak or taking up too much space is something that you will try to correct. If you set that expectation from the get-go, that'll make quieter players feel a little bit more enfranchised to be able to participate in the game. But let's just say they still don't. Even if they still don't, you do have the ability to try to make sure that if you do notice, take a little bit of extra attention, and you do notice that they are struggling to get a word in, use your ability as a storyteller to kind of just keep everyone quiet and say, hang on a second, guys, X wants to be able to speak. Now, some players will hate that even more, so be confident about that. I would recommend, if you do feel like a player is not getting a chance to be able to speak and you get the signs that maybe they're not quite enjoying themselves, pull them aside during the day phase and just kind of ask them, like, are you wanting, like, would you like me to be able to offer you a little bit more time to be able to speak? Some players don't. Some players, like, you shine a light on them to say, what would you like to say, X? No, I'm good. And they'll just shrink down even further. Talk to them. Communication is key.
You can just ask if there's anyone who feels like they haven't been able to get out what they've wanted to say. Or you can specifically word it as, I'm making some space for some of the quieter players. This is useful near the end of the game, where players feel the most pressure to get their worldviews out. Be careful to not have that let the day run too long, though. You still want to keep a pace that's fair and fun. So don't just set aside like 10 minutes for this kind of thing, right? You still want to keep that space somewhat smaller, but you can make specific space for it.
How do you handle storytelling for a group of mixed experience players?
I tend to think of experienced players as people who should be good at bringing other people into the game. That's not always true, but it is generally the thing that I assume of them. And I think that assumption tends to translate into them realizing that that's the onus I'm putting on them. What I mean by this is I will generally play or run a game that makes the people who are the least experienced in the group have the most fun. The experienced people have played a bunch before. They know what the game is. They know what the game is like when it's fun. And I don't need to cater to their desire for like a super advanced game. It is more important that we get new people into the fold who can then also become experienced players. And I generally expect of my experienced players to go along with that, to realize that they were themselves newcomers at some point, and to be like, okay, this game is going to be simpler for me maybe than what I desired to play, but this is how we keep a community going. This is how we end up producing healthy, good groups with people who have played a bunch and enjoy doing that.
You have to run the game for the least experienced player in the group, which is quite a difficult thing to do because often the more experienced players will make that harder for you to do. For example, if you're trying to cater to a guy who hasn't read half the characters on the script, doesn't know the rules upside down, doesn't know exactly all the weird little interactions that can happen, you'll often find that the experienced players will gleefully run rings around them because they've been given an opportunity to, school this new guy or whatever. It's just human nature to want to fire all your ammunition if you've been given a lot of it. And also, those players will often use slang terms like star pass and hard claim and things like that that the new players don't really understand. So I think running a game for a group of mixed experienced players is about ensuring that the experienced players are playing the game for the inexperienced players. Just gently remind them when they say, I hard claim this and then such and such star pass to this person, to be like, hey guys, we've got some new players here, they might not know what a star pass is, maybe just over explain what it is that you're saying so that everybody can understand what's going on. And if you combine that with just regularly checking in with the new players, making sure they understand what's going on, seeing if they've got any questions, giving them advice on how to play better. Don't be afraid to give new players advice. Like, you're not being unfair by doing that. In fact, it's the opposite. You're making it more fair. You're giving that new player a fighting chance. And I mean, there are the obvious things as well, like don't run an atheist game for a new player. I have seen new players thrown into a game of Bad Moon Rising or Sex and Violets, and for their first ever game, and they've done fine. But if you throw 20 people into the ocean who can't swim, one of them will probably not drown. That doesn't mean that you should throw people in the ocean when they can't swim.
There can be a tendency sometimes for more experienced players to sort of take the wheel, as it were, and try to steer the course for other players rather than helping them through the game at their own pace. The main thing that you can do as a storyteller if you are dealing with mixed experienced players, first, play a script that is accessible by everybody. I know that many of us, as we started our Blood on the Clock Tower career gaming experience, whatever you might call it, played a few games of Trouble Brewing, and maybe the hardcore gamers, I consider myself one in this case, wanted to step away. We found Trouble Brewing, for lack of a better word, boring or milieu or basic. When really it is anything but. And I think the majority of very experienced storytellers will return to Trouble Brewing because it is, without a doubt, an immaculate script. So focusing on making sure that players are playing a game with characters that they understand or can more easily understand the interactions between is tantamount. Second, during the course of the game, it's very important to keep in mind some of the tips I discussed with the previous question, because you want to make sure that players have the opportunity to speak up at their own leisure. During some of our initial games, I'm sure many of us preferred, in a certain way, taking the back seat at times, just listening to what was going on and trying to understand. And that is an important part of growing and developing your skill at this game. But we must not forget to make space for these players to participate and make sure that they are enjoying what time they are spending with us at any stage of the game. Lastly, and I think this might be something that doesn't necessarily come to us so readily, during the Grim reveal, highlight some of the plays that these newer players make. Highlight the plays that experienced players make. Draw out these moments, because by drawing out these moments, we invite players to take note of some of the interactions that they might not have been aware of, some of the really intricate plays that they might have missed, and invite them to grow and develop their skill, much in the same way that we all have as veteran players. And in doing so, we welcome people to do one of the most important things in this community, which is come back and play with us again.
I like to kind of make that aware from the beginning without naming names and just say, hey, I just want everybody to know that we do have some players here who are a little bit newer to the game that might not have it as down pat as everybody else. So I would like to encourage everyone, just like every other game, that if they have any kind of questions, to reach out to me as the impartial third party. That's part of the whole Rule 3 part of the rules explanation for storytellers. But beyond that, there's things that can be done on a little bit more of a minute basis, a little bit more of an individual basis. One of them is that you can find players that are in your playgroup who you know are a little bit more experienced and maybe are a little bit more open to talking to people. And you can actually be matchmaker and have them meet up with some of the firmer players, because they're probably not going to seek each other out. I mean, this is a game where you talk to each other, but maybe players will like be afraid. The newer players might be afraid that there's like cliquishness or groups that have their own in-jokes and stuff like that, and they don't want to get involved, that kind of thing. They don't want to be awkward. So embrace the cringe and literally take experienced player and inexperienced player and bring them together and say, hey, Amy, this is Ben. Ben, this is Amy. Ben's been playing the game for 5 years at this point. He's pretty experienced. Amy's only got a couple of games under her belt. So I just want you to know that if you guys have any kind of questions, Ben's a really good resource to be able to reach out for if I'm not available.
How do you handle players advising you on how to storytell?
You know what? I think there's
I feel like this was one we have a lot of experience with, not so much from players, but we both, stream this game a lot on Twitch. And we get a lot of Twitch users who tell us how to storyteller.
I'm gonna be honest. I think I really do my best not to get irritated by it. But I do think there's a natural inclination to feel like, hey, yeah, I'm the storyteller here. Thank you. I know what I'm doing. But I think you can be nice about that. I think you can, say thanks for your opinion. I appreciate that. Maybe we could talk about that after the game. But right now I'm running this game, and I'm going to go ahead and run it the way that I think is right. You don't have the Grim. I have the Grim. I know what's going on. I think being respectful and appreciative of a player who's trying to give you advice is great. It's always great to get advice from many sources, but fundamentally, like, you're running the game. It's your game to run. Don't let the players try to bully you into doing different things.
Yeah, if a player starts offering, like, the short answer is, if a player starts doing this, you could say, I can talk about my storytelling decisions after the game. That's the first step. That's the polite answer. Because you should. If there's, like, big controversial storytelling decisions, you should explain why you did it at the end of the game. You should make a note of it in your head or jot it down on a piece of paper. That's step one. If the player continues, how's librarian the situation? Like, you can't let your storytelling be compromised by one player's opinions on how things should go, because that's not fair to the other 4 to 19. Now that I think of it, because you can have between 5 and 20 players in a game of Cloud. Or I don't do a lot of teens and those are travelers, as that answer applies. But like, yeah, like ultimately, it's you should first try the simple thing of, hey, I'll talk about my storytelling decisions after the game. The Grim is what it is, and we'll talk about it after the game. If you have questions, then I'm happy to talk about it after. That's step one. If they won't take that for an answer, if they disrupt the game by continuing to say, hey, this is what the storyteller should be doing here, or why did you do that when you could have done this, just toss in a house librarian. Like,
it's a great multifunctional tool.
Like, you can't let players try to tell you how to storytell mid-game.
And just for clarity, reasonable storytellers can disagree on the right course of action in any situation. Emma and I both storytell a lot, and we both storytell a little bit differently, and things that I would do, Emma might not do, and things that Emma might do, I might not do, and that goes for any storyteller. that doesn't mean that we know better than you or that your players know better than you. And certainly a player is not in the right situation or frame of mind to make judgments about your storytelling in the moment.
First, I make sure that I hear them without judgment and understand their feedback correctly. This might include repeating the advice back to the player and ensure that I understand their advice right. Second, I tell them that I will do my best to incorporate their advice during this game, but I might have already made some choices that might not line up with their advice, and I will do my best to address it after the game. And I will attempt to make sure that I incorporate their advice as long as it is constructive and contributes to all of the players having fun, rather than just the one player giving the advice. Finally, I remind them that as the storyteller, any rulings that I have to make up during the game are final and not up for debate because it might have already affected the game, and I will answer any questions on how I might have ruled something honestly, and if any of them are wrong, I'll let the players know after the game, and I will do my best to correct myself in the future games, and I will also tell the players this.
Backseat storytellers can really derail your momentum if you don't have a plan to deal with them. Some folks will offer tips because they're excited and they want the game to shine, while others may just want to assert dominance. Either way, just remember this: validate and redirect. Briefly acknowledge their concern and then set your boundary. Totally get that. Different storytellers do it different ways. I've got a flow that works for me, but I appreciate the thought. Or, I hear ya, and I'll definitely think about that after the game is over, but for now I need to keep things rolling. Basically, you're letting them know that feedback is welcome, but on your terms. Generally, after the game has ended is the best time for those types of conversations.
This happens a lot, and it's funny because I think I've probably storytold over 1,000 games, but not everyone knows this, right? Especially because I don't do a lot of storytelling online, and so when I storytell in person, there's always like a group of people who, if I explain the rules or during the game, either out loud or to me privately, come and say, "Oh, you should really do this way," or "This way kind of works better," or "That's not quite right," or "That's a simplification," or "Have you thought about?" And I think it's usually done with good intentions. In practice, of course, it's mostly really frustrating. I think the way you react to it matters a lot, right? Because you don't necessarily want to shoot down these people because, again, it's usually coming from a good place. But usually the response I come with is something along the lines of, thanks, I appreciate it, but I have my own way that I want to do this. If it's something where they're like clarifying a rule that you got wrong, then of course I think some humbleness is useful here, or some humility, and to say, "Oh, that's a good point, I'll take that into account for the next game."
What are ways you've made the game accessible for players that might need a little extra help?
The good news about making Clock Tower accessible is that the game has a lot of space for accessibility. It's just not necessarily obvious how you get there in a lot of cases. The problem that you're always going to encounter is that almost every accessibility need is different. So there's no golden rule to just be like, yeah, if you have someone with accessibility needs, do X. Because obviously those requirements are going to be different for someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, someone blind, someone neurodivergent issues or mental health issues. They're all going to have different requirements. So step one on running games for people that might need a little extra help to be able to access the game is talk to the person. They obviously know what needs they have in the rest of life, especially those who have some situation that makes it more difficult for them in the talking sense. So especially those that are deaf and hard of hearing, people that are blind obviously have their own preferred means. They might be using Braille, they might be using text-to-speech, they might be using any number of different methods to cater to their own individual requirements. So the first thing you always need to do is talk to them. And usually there are ways to fit into those requirements. So I have run games in the past for people who are hard of hearing, who just had a friend with them to interpret for them. In their early games, that usually meant using the revolutionary and having both the interpreter and the hard of hearing person play as one player. Play with the revolutionary or play as one player between them. Just treat them as one human because that made it easier. In some games, you can use revolutionaries. You don't necessarily have to. A lot of people, the first rule is always just to put the revolutionary in. It's always worth talking to the player as to whether they need that and whether that's going to help them, especially if they're turning up to a group that they don't know. That can be quite intense as well because of the nature of revolutionary pairings. And then for almost everything else, it is always talking to the person. There is an accessibility section on the Clock Tower website which details a lot of ways that you can help people out. It is by no means exhaustive. I think there's accounts on there of methods that I used in the past at conventions when we've had people just roll up and say, look, I want to play but I don't know if I can, and my answer is always, well, we're going to make it happen. It's just, it might take a minute for us to establish some signals and some agreed upon norms for this game. So you're always going to have to flex a little bit, but I don't think I've ever had to fundamentally change anything about Clock Tower in order to allow anyone to play. So you shouldn't need to. Having said that, if you're ever in doubt as to how you can help someone get into the game when they have specific requirements that might make it very difficult, give me a shout, because I'm sure we can work something out between us.
How can players make your job as a storyteller easier?
I think, like, for this one, the big thing that players can do is, and this isn't even necessarily just for you, it's for themselves. Don't talk when I'm talking. Don't talk when someone else is defending themselves after they've been nominated. Like, don't talk when someone is trying to gossip or juggle. Like, one of the rules of the game is you can say anything you want at any time. But if that doesn't actually extend to speaking at the same time someone else is trying to speak in a situation where the attention should be on them. I think that's the number one thing that sort of can derail a game from the storyteller's perspective, is when players will not stop talking when someone else who has, for lack of a word, speaking priority is talking. Whether that's me as a storyteller running a vote, or me as a storyteller trying to listen to someone's gossip so I can put down the true or false token, or one of your fellow players trying to explain why you shouldn't execute them. Like, these are the things you as a player, like, if you decide you need to talk over that, it's going to be rough. I think that's the one thing. Other thing is, if you think a mistake has been made, let me know. If you are pretty sure you're supposed to wake up because you were the butler, and I didn't come around to tell you, find some way to surreptitiously, tap me on the shoulder during the day and say, I need to make my butler fixed. It can be a lot to manage a game, and, doing stuff like that. Just, sort of being kind, civil, and respectful. The same things you should do because you're not a jerk.
Yeah, don't be a jerk. That's a really good way to help make my job as a storyteller easier. Come to the game ready to play the game with everyone else, to listen to other people. Remember that you're not the main character in this story, even if you pulled the demon token, right? It's a game everyone's playing together. And it sure helps the storyteller a lot when we don't have to tell you to make space for other people. It's important that everybody gets a chance to participate in the game. And I think if you're playing in good faith, you can have a lot of fun. You can, play a competitive game where you're really trying to win, and ultimately be kind to everyone and treat everyone with respect. Make space for everyone to participate. going to be another cheesy one, I'm afraid, but just have fun. Like, what do we do? I feel like a lot of us GMs don't really sit down and ask ourselves very often, what is it that we're getting out of this? Why do we not want to play, or why do we prefer to not play and prefer to run instead? Because on paper, you would think, well, hey, this is a game, and you play games, and I'm here never playing the game and always refereeing it, always being the guy that's running it. That seems like it would be not as much fun, right? But to me, it's more fun. Why is it more fun? Because I get to, when I run a game for 15 people, if all 15 of them are having fun, I have fun vicariously through them, and I have 15 times the amount of fun because I get to see all of those guys enjoying themselves. And I just kind of feed off of that energy, much the same way that I feed off the energy of those 4 terrible musicians that I mentioned a minute ago having fun. I enjoy and get a lot of pleasure from seeing a bunch of people have fun with a thing that I've set up and created. So it makes it all worthwhile to me if everyone's having a good time, and that's really all I want from my players. That's all I need to make it easier for me.
Remember, ultimately, give yourself grace. You're worth it. I'll see you in DC.